Beletrina, v živo.
Danes se pogovarjamo z enim najeminentnejših in tudi najbolj prevajanih sodobnih litvanskih pesnikov, Eugenijom Ališanko. Gre za osebo tudi zanimivo življenjsko zgodbo, avtorja številnih pesniških knjig in tudi esejev. Izbor iz njegove poezije je pred letošnjimi Dnevi poezije in vina objavljen v knjigi Če, ki vsebuje tudi enega od njegovih esejev. Gre za zanimivega sogovornika in prav tako zelo intrigantnega pesnika, tako da vas vabimo k poslušanju in branju.
So, reading your selected poems, I've got the impression that your poetics through time is quite similar to some of the best Slovenian poets of your generation, or to put it in other words, of Slovenian poets of 90s and early 2000s. And what's particularly interesting is that in that time period, they turned towards American influence or towards American everyday poetry a lot. Did the same process occur in Lithuania, and did the American poetry of the second half of 20th century had the same influence on your writing?
Well, I don't dare to speak about Lithuanian poetry in general. It's yeah, of course, there are some influences of American authors. I know some writers, but in my case, it was a bit different. Actually, when I started writing, I didn't really care about some traditions. I learned from very different books, mostly Lithuanian authors, as well as some translated books into Lithuanian. So at the beginning it was like Rainer Maria Rilke, Georg Trakl, or Tom Stearns Eliot. So it was very, very different authors, and I was looking for some of my own voice, and I tried to be as abstract as possible, actually, at my first books, in my first books. And just there is even one poem which was called Crystallography. So it was really making poems like almost metaphysical, like crystals, without any concrete details of concrete life. So, and my book was called The City of Ash, and then I understood poetry as some message from higher fields and so on. So it was a kind of Apollonic poetry. And later, with my third and mostly with my fourth book, I moved to a completely different way. And somehow it happened quite naturally with my life, with changes in my life. And my fourth book, it was called From Unwritten Histories. And actually, this book is translated into Slovenian. And this book is mostly, I was telling stories. I tell stories, mostly imaginative, but there are mostly stories, and they deal with my everyday life, with some names, with some figures, with concrete life, let's say. And at that time, I was translating Zbigniew Herbert, and I found him very, very close to my writing. And at the same time, I was working as a scientific researcher in the Institute of Art and Culture, and I was working on a book which was called An Imagining Man. And later, that was earlier. And later, I was working on the book which was called The Return of Dionysus. And this book was about postmodernism in culture. And for me, it was very close ideas of postmodernism in my writing. So, and I became myself maybe more Dionysic in my writing. And there is, for example, one cycle of poems in this book, which is called From the History of Trade. And it's based on my travel across Europe on this literary express, Europe 2000, where actually we were together with Ališanka. And yeah, of course, there were many writers, poets mostly, who impressed me. But mostly they were those Polish and some Slovenian authors as well. So, and I think that this is not the influence of American poetry, but mostly this Eastern European literature
of the time, yeah, or perhaps even some of the Central European.
Yeah, Central Eastern European
this era. Yeah, you mentioned how in some of your poems you tell stories, and my next question is exactly about relationship between poetry and storytelling. To quote some of your lines in Slovenian translation, rad bi sodobni roman brez konca, brez nauka. I want contemporary novel without ending, without some teaching, let's say. It's from one of the my favorite poems from this selection. And it's actually a love poem, a poem about a man who ends a relationship and he's thinking about some conclusion. And but this line is talked to me specifically because myself as a poet, I'm often thinking about what is the relationship between a poem and a novel. In some sense, poem to me appears larger, contains larger meaning than let's say average novel, exactly because there is no chance of ending. Usually a good poem, in my opinion, doesn't have an ending and can be read in different directions at the same time. So what do you think about this relationship in a time where a novel is a lot more popular than poetry? If we talk about Western culture in particular. Also, I noticed that you are also a writer of essays, and this is also one pattern I observed among the people, or among the poets. They write when they write prose, they usually write essays. But the similarity between poetry and essays is that the essays too don't usually have some strict ending or conclusion.
Well, interesting thing is that the poem you mentioned, this is the word in Lithuanian romanas, and in English it's a novel. But in Lithuanian, romanas has a double meaning. It's romanas, but it might mean love affair. So this poem you might read in different levels. So it's like a two levels, a level of language and a level of life. So I would say that sometimes I feel like translating from life into language. So it's a kind of process of translation. And life as a language as a life, and so the translation, of course, might be different. It might be very word by word, but sometimes it's very imaginative or improvising. So this is how I feel like writing. But well, when I was young, or people when they are young, they consider poems as the best expression of their experience. But when you get older, somehow you try to think about your history, about your past, and it grows into a bigger things. And for me, it was like that. I started from poems. At the beginning, I was writing academical essays, so they were really very different in the writing. But lately, I started writing more essays, and those essays became literary essays. And actually, I wrote quite a few poems which are in prose. And for me, somehow I started looking for possibility to express myself in different ways. And now for me, it's not so big difference between a poem and essay, for example.
Okay.
And some people, well, you say that the essay has no ending, but my essays mostly they have some kind of ending. It's like there is a short narrative which have some start and then the ending, and somehow you play inside. And for me,
So
it's
the
like
ultimate, the ultimate
yeah, for me,
the conclusion. Okay.
Yeah, for me, it's an essay is very similar to a poem. And I remember once I was in Finland, in Turku, there was a festival, and I read a long essay about some things, but it was a really long essay. And after the reading, one Finnish author came to me and said, "You know, this is not an essay. This is a poem." So for me, it's really important to write to even since a couple of years I was writing columns for one literary magazine. So and then every column is like an essay, and it has very subtle structure inside. So it's like a poem. And for me, a poem it has an ending and essay as well.
Okay, thank you. Reading your poetry in general, of course, your poetics have been changing through time, but in general, I had this impression that on the outside or some exoteric level, there is a lot of lightness and a subtle irony and even other sorts of humor. But when you dig a little deeper, when you read poem after poem, a more gloomy image starts to appear, as if there is some very heavy stuff down there that through the process of writing a poem gets in a way maybe not resolved completely, but gets a lighter note. So in a way, those poems appear therapeutic to me. What is your opinion between reading and writing a poetry and, let's say, self-healing or emotional therapy? Can poetry be a companion through life in that way?
Well, as I said, when I started writing, at the beginning, my poems were mostly abstract, and they were very serious and heavy, and in content and in expression, and then my changes went through this that I moved to more ironic way of writing. And I think that this, Jesus Christ, he never smiles, actually. And Apollo as well. I tried to find any picture or sculpture of him where he smiles. No, he does not smile. But Dionysus smiles. Yeah. So this is the move from openly heavy text to irony way of expression, and irony is not a joke, actually. Irony is a very serious stuff, and usually it hides something very, very heavy and very gloomy, sometimes things. Actually, irony sometimes is on the margin of despair. But it's this is a game as well. So I think Viktor Frankl, he said that the sense of life is to find the sense of life, or something like that. So in that way, I think that the poem might help a little bit, might be a little bit healing when you are stuck in some situation, and poetry, like many other things, they might kick you out of this position, of your ordinary situation, of your ordinary vision of life. So in that way, well, it works. Might work actually, but mostly I find poetry more and more like a laboratory of language. It's a bit more academical stuff, which is important for poets themselves, so to say, for those professional specialists of language and
yeah, poetry is going in a way through a sort of crisis that's been going on for maybe decades, especially in the Western world. And there is almost no serious poet in Europe today who doesn't have some meta-poetical poems about writing poetry, and everyone has his or her own interpretation of how poetry relates to the society and world today in general. Do you have some thoughts about this to share? Because I would be very interesting to hear what someone from Lithuania, for example, thinks about this.
Yeah, I think that, well, a poet or anyone who works with thoughts or ideas, the first question is to start from yourself. You have to start from yourself, and you have to answer the question, who I am and what I'm doing in this beautiful or stupid world. So you have to answer to those questions, and that's why the poet, well, at least the guy who writes poetry, and he has to ask what he is doing. That's why I do actually more often than earlier, of course. What is the sense of my writing? What I do with this? What for? And this is that's why there are many doubts about works, and I find many things more important in a way than poetry, especially presently. When the war in Ukraine started, I almost stopped writing, and somehow I feel that there is something overwhelming me, and I cannot write about it. And to write about something different is like a hypocrisy. I cannot. That's very strange. So that's you are like in laboratory, and you think what you have to. More and more doubts. And well, I have I have a history of myself, and I was born in Siberia. My grandparents were deported into Siberia, and my grandfathers, they died both there.
They were
shot
expelled,
down.
if I'm not wrong, they were expelled to Siberia by the government or something.
Yeah. This was deportations from Lithuania in 1941. So my parents, they grew up there, and I was born there. And so this history, history of relationships between Lithuania and Russia, and between me and Russian history, so it is very vivid. So I use those topics, of course, quite often in poetry, but mostly in essays. So my book of essays actually is like my story of my life. It's the street between two churches, and actually there is one essay in this book from that book. In this book in Slovenian will be published. So this is the story which very important for me. But this what is happening now for me is to have it, to write about it. Well, Ukrainians, they do it. I read lots of Ukrainian poems published, well, in Facebook, for example, and then some friends who know Ukrainian, they translate a lot. So I read it, and I feel that this is, for them, this is a time for poetry. For me, I don't feel like that.
It's up to them to decide. But I've remembered this famous and a lot of time misused saying by Adorno that poetry after Auschwitz should not be or can't be written.
Yeah.
I've read that also you move a lot, you travel a lot. How did the freedom of movement and traveling and experiencing the world in this, let's say, more free way influenced your writing? Is it still important? You said that nowadays it's a laboratory of language, but does it has like, does it, okay, luckily we are not live. V smislu, da ima vtis nek, da pušča na pisanje.
Influence, right?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Does the experience of traveling a lot, meeting with different cultures and so on, and experiencing in world more as a whole in general, has still some traces in your writing of your poetry, or does it have different influence on poetry than it has on essays?
Well, the traveling is and was very important for me since almost since childhood. So I really like traveling, and it was very important for me somehow to get to know more about the world where I live in. And I always remember one dream which I had in Soviet times, when the Iron Curtain was still standing. And the dream was like that. I dreamt I was crawling to the border with Poland. There was some fence, and I crawled under the fence. And suddenly I got a bliss on the other side. And the bliss was like, it was like a paradise. But I remember very well, there was nothing there. No, I don't know, no buildings, no people, no houses, nothing. Just I felt that I was in a completely different world, like in a paradise. So it was very important for me always to cross those borders to go further on. And another story is when I went to Medana for the first time in 1998. I was staying with some wine producer, and in his beautiful house. It was on the very border with Italy. And I remember I had such a huge wish to go to Italy. Although I saw the same vineyards, nothing else. But somehow I felt that I need it very strongly. And well, I did not, but that was always the need to cross those borders which confine you. So, and that's why I traveled a lot. And of course, some travels, they were very important for me, and just to expand my imagination. Or, for example, I went to Indonesia, to volcano of Bromo volcano, and I made a very risky trip around this volcano. And so for me, it left even my latest book of essays was called somehow connected with this my short trip, which was called a shoe of Empedocles. And according to the legend, this Greek philosopher, he fell into the volcano, and the volcano spit out his shoe. And so this was very interesting, and I was asking in one of my essays if this volcano would have spit my shoe if I fell inside. So it was the imagination, important for imagination and for my experience. But of course, I use those well, traveling. I never write. I am very deep in traveling. So like when I drive, I just drive. Even talking for me is quite complicated. Same with traveling. I really very deep in this traveling and really drinking everything from surroundings. But later when I start writing, then some things they pop out. And when I write poetry, so usually I start from the blank page, and usually I do not know what the poem will be about. I just concentrate and wait for some image. I don't know even what it will be from my past, from present. But somehow just looking for some idea to come, not idea, but some image, and then I make it grow up. So, but in essays, yeah, one my book which I mentioned is the Shoe of Empedocles. So this book is actually all book about my travels. So it's some essays, big essays about travel. For example, one essay is about my traveling to Tanzania, and this essay is 70 pages. So it's actually this. It's a
would be a book or
really, yeah, it's a really important thing, and so of course I connect everything with, it's not travelogues, of course. This is in this essay on Tanzania, for example. So I made a parallel between my trip and other books.
Okay.
So it's so this is really very, very important, especially for essays. But as I said, some things they show up in poems as well, but late.
Traveling can be poetry in real time, living poetry for me, for example. Yeah, you don't need to write when you travel, because you're living.
That's true.
Yeah. Okay, I'm sure we would have an interesting conversation if we continued, but we are limited in time, so I will end my questions, and maybe we will talk more when you come to the festival.
Sure. Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you for the questions, and hope to see you soon.
Yeah, I also hope to see you. You're an interesting person.
Beletrina, v živo.